Hello, I'm Patty Cook, and I'm going to tell you about my visit to Jeju Island and my experience with the women sea divers, the Haenyeo. Click, click, click went the shutter of my Nikon camera as I nervously tried to snatch a shot of what I couldn't believe I was seeing. A group of elderly Korean women in slick black wetsuits, diving goggles, holding spears and flippers emerged from a wooded path just a few feet from where I stood. They passed me without acknowledgement and proceeded to climb the very steep rustic steps in single file leading to the grounds of my hotel. I quickly switched to video mode. In my haste, I turned the camera sideways, not realizing that that's the way it would come out. I guess I'm not quite the photojournalist I thought I was. These women seemed to defy their age, and despite carrying all that gear, they moved energetically and with purpose. They were on a mission, and I had to hustle to keep up with them. Upon reaching the top of the embankment, the group sat down to rest and refresh on the grassy lawn of my hotel that overlooked the boundless sea below. Great, I thought. Now I will have a chance to really document this most serendipitous occurrence. When they saw me, I pointed to my camera in a gesture asking permission to take photos, but the woman who seemed to be the group leader waved me off sternly, shaking her head in disapproval. How could I let this opportunity pass? When would I ever visit Jeju Island again? Now I was on a mission. I pretended to walk away, and when I had put enough space between me and the women, I crouched down behind some foliage and zoomed in on my unusual subjects, who were none other than the legendary Haenyeo, the famed women sea divers of Jeju Island, South Korea. I understood their reluctance and desire to be left alone. Although Korean women divers have been harvesting underwater delicacies such as abalone, turban shell, seaweed, and conch for centuries, they have lived and worked in relative obscurity. Recently, however, interest and fascination has peaked as their numbers dwindle and the rest of the world wants to learn more about these unique and almost mythical Jeju Island grannies of the sea. I became curious about the Haenyeo before my first trip to Jeju Island in July of 2014, when I stumbled across an article in the New York Times. The writer described these superwomen of the sea who dive to depths up to 20 feet without the use of breathing equipment. Holding their breath for up to 3 minutes, they use spears or bare hands to gather their bounty of marine life to be sold on the land. They can dive up to 100 times a day when it's harvest season, spending approximately 7 hours underwater. A whistling sound called a sumsipsori is emitted as the Haenyeo resurfaces. This ancient breathing technique, unique to the Haenyeo, allows the diver to replenish their oxygen for the next plunge. The sumsipsori also serves as a method for communicating with other Haenyeo. Remarkably, these Korean divers are outliers in a culture based on Confucian principles, placing men at the top of the family hierarchy and women in the more subservient role of wife and mother. Things are slowly changing in Korea, but for generations, the Haenyeo have been their family's primary breadwinners, becoming Korea's first working moms. Jeju is a rugged volcanic island located off the southern tip of the Korean peninsula and is known for its semi-tropical climate, orange groves, black rocky beaches, and seaside honeymoon resorts. The hotel I stayed at, the Jeju Hilton, even had a beautiful gleaming white chapel on the premises, giving a new meaning to the descriptive phrase all-inclusive. But Jeju Island hasn't always been the vacation hotspot of Asia. Before tourism brought more job opportunities and economic prosperity to the region, Jeju was known as an abandoned island where kings banished their political enemies, and the barren, unforgiving topography made it almost impossible to farm or live off the land. The locals describe their homeland as having what they call the three abundances, or samda. They are wind, black igneous rocks, and women. By the 17th century, most men went off to sea and in many cases never returned, leaving the burden of providing for their families up to their wives. Historical events such as the Japanese occupation from 1910 to 1945, the April 3rd massacre in 1948, and the Korean War from 1950 to 1953 also contributed to the depletion of the male population on the island. With the pressure of survival, diving became a lifeline for the Haenyeo, their families and their descendants. But let's go back to my brief but momentous encounter with the Haenyeo on my second trip to Jeju Island. It occurred on that trip in July of 2019. In the time between my two trips, I began to learn more about this enchanted island, how its turbulent history, rugged terrain, and mythical culture full of spirits and shamans shaped the people who live there. Locals believe that the island is inhabited by 18,000 gods and goddesses who oversee almost everything from the sea and wind to kitchens and bathrooms. Twice a year, the Haenyeo perform ritualistic ceremonies, making offerings to the goddesses of the wind for protection and for abundance. Belief in a guiding force outside of themselves is an integral part of their ability to face the perilous and physically demanding work that they do. For the women who become Haenyeo, their life's work is more than a vocation. It is a necessity. Although many describe feelings of being at peace under the water, being free of aches and pains, their arduous work takes a toll on their well-being. However, just like the changing tides, the times are changing for the Jeju women divers of South Korea. Once considered a very low occupation and looked down upon in Korean society, with a surge in recent interest, the Haenyeo are now viewed with pride. In 2016, UNESCO included the Haenyeo on their representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Today, many restaurants on Jeju Island are affiliated with the Haenyeo, and they have become an important part of the tourism industry. As I mentioned before, this was my second trip to Jeju Island, but it was my sixth expedition to the Korean Peninsula. In 2007, I began accompanying my husband and his Taekwondo students to the land of the morning calm, to deepen their study with the art in its birthplace. I fell in love with the culture, history, food, and people of this complex country. Even though I am not a Taekwondoist, I appreciate seeing the roots of this awe-inspiring but deadly martial art, and as a result, better understand the nature of the Korean people and their culture. Before embarking on our journey, we were encouraged to view the experience as a martial pilgrimage, exploring the spiritual landscape of the country and setting aside our preconceived expectations of what it would be like there. With that mindset, you were more open to and prepared for the wonders and the challenges that will inevitably occur when you are so far out of your comfort zone. Now back to my lucky day. After witnessing the group of women divers that morning, I was elated and couldn't wait to tell my fellow travelers about my adventure. After breakfast and Taekwondo training, our guide, Mr. Kim, announced that we would be visiting the legendary Dragon Rock for a hike along the windy northern coast. Little did we realize that we would be in for another Haenyeo-related surprise. There were about 30 of us on this particular trip, and we must have really stood out in our black and yellow training suits as we navigated the wet, slippery rocks on the jagged coastline. A few minutes after we began our soiree, we came upon another unusual sight. It looked like a makeshift open-air restaurant right on the rocks. A crude tent was set up on the water's edge where the locals and tourists were seated on small stools scattered among the rocks, eating and drinking. As we got closer, we could see a few Korean women in their characteristic sunbonnets squatting down among bowls of squirming sea creatures, slicing and serving these delicacies to their anxious customers. Looking out at the bright orange floats bobbing out in the water, there was no doubt that these enterprising Haenyeo had come up with the brilliant idea of dispensing with the middleman and selling directly to their hungry patrons. Game for a culinary excursion, And with the assistance of our guide and Korean members of our group, we ordered plates of possibly the freshest seafood I've ever eaten. And if we were a little squeamish about eating such exotic morsels, soju, the uniquely Korean alcoholic beverage of choice, helped us wash it all down. With our unexpected banquet by the sea was one of those miraculous experiences worth savoring. The past, the present, the ancient, and the modern all blended together in that brief moment as we became cultural pioneers. With our senses satiated and our spirits fortified, we were ready for whatever our next adventure would take us. Now, back on our tour bus, we made our way up the coast to Siapkikoli on the eastern coast. I would be remiss if I didn't say a few words about Mr. Hee-young Kim, our Korean travel guide extraordinaire. This was actually his second tour with us. We liked him so much the first time that we requested him again for this trip, which is no easy feat. A true professional in every way, he was an encyclopedia of all things Korean. With his command of the English language, he captivated us every day with fascinating history lessons, entertaining stories, and compelling insights into the Korean ethos. Respect is not just a word to the Korean people. As one of our students commented, respect is intrinsic to their nature, an instilled sense of politeness and unassuming spirit. As it turns out, there is a word in Korean, the Korean language, just for this aspect of the Korean mentality. Jaeong is a uniquely Korean sense of empathetic connectedness and social obligation between people. To experience this firsthand and return it was a gift that none of us will ever forget. One of my favorite parts about these journeys is the bus ride. It feels as if time is suspended and you sit back and watch the spectacular scenery glide by. There is a comfort in not being able to read the signs and putting your faith in the guide and the bus driver. You can let yourself be in the moment and practice your beginner's mind, a Zen Buddhist term for experiencing life without preconceived ideas or expectations about something. Seeing things with an open, fresh mind, just like a beginner. We arrived at Siapkikoli, a popular tourist destination with sweeping views of the ocean. This area, used as a filming site for many Korean movies and drama, and gets its name from its shape, jutting out into the sea, with koji being the Jeju dialect for cape. As we stepped out of the bus, we were greeted by a stiff wind and light rain, which really added to the atmospheric aura of the place. We stood safely on the shore. We watched the fishermen bracing against the weather and on the slippery rocks, casting their lines out into the roiling sea. Fighting the wind, we walked up the seaside pathway that led to the Beacon Firehouse, set against the backdrop of Seonjang Ilchebong Tuff Cone, also known as Sunrise Peak. This remarkable geological formation rises 180 meters above sea level due to a magma flow under the sea 5,000 years ago. Resembling a gigantic ancient castle, it has a bowl-like crater at the top of with a stunning view of the sea and the countryside. We were told if you timed it right, you can witness a Haenyeo women diver show in the nearby waters. A word of caution though, do not expect an entertainment show. This event is set up for you to experience the livelihoods and culture in the present day and not a scripted performance. Our next stop was Sonjugup Folk Village. This is a working village located at the foot of Mount Hallasan, one of the 3 spirit mountains and the tallest peak in South Korea. It is an active volcano that erupted 5,000 years ago and forms the bulk of Jeju Island. Mount Hallasan is central to the island's identity, and locals believe it gave birth to the island. No matter where you go, you can see the distinctive profile and feels like a looming presence. This celebrated mountain was designated a national park and a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve in 1970 and is famous for its vertical ecosystem of plants and animal species resulting from various temperatures along the mountainside. When we arrived at Sonjugup Folk Village, we stepped back in time. This inhabited village holds a vast amount of culture over a wide period of time from 1410 to 1914. As we roamed through the village of low thatched huts and kimchi pots, you could really get a feel for a bygone era of life on Jeju Island. Cultural assets, both tangible and intangible, abound, from Confucian shrines, fortress ruins, folk plays and craftsmen, to ancient trees and even the traditional Jeju bathroom, called a chongji, where villagers sat on a stone mound while pigs fed on human waste. One of the other treasures that greets you at the entrance to Cheonggup Folk Village are the ancient iconic grandfather stone statues, Oldor Halabang. Before my first trip to Jeju, I became fascinated by these unusual sculptures and wanted to learn more about their history. Nowadays, you can't go anywhere on Jeju without seeing these whimsical creations sold as tourist trinkets, plastic juice bottles, or imposing statues in all sizes. Dol is the Korean word for stone, and traditionally they are made out of the porous volcanic rock that is in abundance on the island. Harabang is the word for grandfather in the Jeju vernacular. Their origins are mysterious, but they are often attributed to the island's shamanistic traditions. It is thought that they may have been called grandfather or elder because of their commanding appearance, and considered to be guardians of the island, warding off evil spirits or even enemy attackers. In true tourist fashion, I had to take one home, but why just one? I bought two. One is now watching over my garden, and the other stands as a sentry at my back door. I smile every time I see them, knowing that I have a small part of Jeju Island history and folklore right in my own backyard. It doesn't hurt to have a little extra protection either. Even though my visits to Jeju Island were short, I couldn't help but feel the pervasive sense of enchantment everywhere I went. From the misty mountains and windswept seaside to the haunted history and entrancing folklore legends, the feeling of otherworldliness penetrated my psyche. I began to wonder if Jeju Island was the model for the mysterious fictional island Bali High from the famous musical South Pacific, and to think that a place like that really exists. To understand the culture of the Haenyeo and their history is to see their lives through this mystical, spiritual lens. In the normal course of a day's work, these women divers must confront uncertainty and physical danger in order to do their jobs. Since the beginning, they have come to rely on shamanistic rituals and ceremonies as a way to find peace and security in their unpredictable underwater world. Shamanism on Jeju Island is another livelihood dominated by women, and interviews with these transcendental messengers reveal a profession that is dying out. As more people turn to science and medicine to cure their problems, and less modern-day Koreans want to pursue this calling, the demand for the services and talents of the Jeju shamans is dwindling. Still, the roots of this folkloric tradition run deep in Korean culture, and many see the value in this historic and auspicious pursuit. The Haenyeo participate in several shamanistic traditions during the year, the largest being the Hado-ri Jamsu, another word for Haenyeo, gut. A gut is a rite performed by the shaman that involves offerings to the gods and goddesses, and consists of rhythmic movements, drumming, singing, praying, and communication with the spirit on the human's behalf. An important custom for the Haenyeo is the ceremony for the Dragon King, or the god of the ocean, held on the 8th day of the 3rd lunar month. An old Haenyeo saying goes, "Earn from the heavens, spend on earth," which implies the belief that there is a direct link between their fate as divers and the relationship to the gods, especially the Dragon King. 3 days before the gut, the Haenyeo prepare rice cakes and other foods to offer the gods, hoping for an abundant harvest. Drums sound to initiate the event, then the lead shaman rings a bell to awaken the gods in heaven and strikes a gong to summon the gods on earth. Describing the emotions that arise during the experience, one shaman said, "Through the dancing and talking, I tell the gods what the Haenyeo want and need for the year, and get the messages from the gods. We concentrate with our whole heart, mind, and body. Sometimes we cry." As I previously mentioned, the other yearly tradition is the Yeongdongget gut, of which there are two. The first one welcomes the goddess of the wind, who stays for 2 weeks with the accompanying spirits. During that time, she scatters seeds for seaweed, abalone, and conch in the sea for bountiful yield. At the welcoming ceremony, the gods are not allowed into the ceremonial site, but afterwards, the food that was gathered is thrown into the sea as an offering. People taking part in the gut bring bags of rice for the attending fortune tellers. At the end of the gut, these older women grab a fistful of rice, throw it up in the air, catching several grains in their hand. Clinching 6 grains of rice is the best luck. 8 signifies a good harvest, and 12 is good too. The numbers 4, 7, and 9 are considered bad luck. If a guest got good numbers, they swallow the grains. If a bad number is caught, the grains are thrown into the sea. After the 2-week period, it is time to bid farewell to the visiting gods and goddesses. Many handmade straw boats are launched from the shore to carry them back to their ethereal world. Some of the older shamans interviewed complained that the spiritual practice that has sustained the Jeju Island Haenyeo and fishermen over the centuries has become something of a spectacle for curious tourists, students, and journalists. Still, they take pride in their profession, believing that the original intent of the ritual should be honored. Many organizations, including the Haenyeo Museum in Hado-ri, recognize this fundamental component of Haenyeo life and are making every effort to preserve this vital link between the past and the present. Confucianism, understood to have originated in ancient China, permeates the culture, lifestyle, and habits of many Asian countries, and Korea is no exception. Simply stated, it is a system of thought or behavior that places an emphasis on family, family hierarchy, and social harmony. It is not considered a religion, but rather a way of life or moral code. Traditionally, the Korean people follow this patriarchal order, even though the lines are blurring in modern-day Korea. In contrast, and out of necessity, the Haenyeo of Jeju Island have taken on both roles of breadwinners and caretakers, becoming the backbone of their families and close-knit villages. Sometimes referred to as the Amazons of Asia, these brave wives, mothers, grandmothers, and daughters sustain their communal culture by passing down skills and a sense of responsibility from senior to junior. Groups of Haenyeo belong to diving and fishing cooperatives in their respective villages known as Iengoche. These organizations are responsible for setting strict regulations pertaining to the methods, boundaries, and timing for catching and gathering sea life. They also reflect the deep respect and reverence these hard-working women feel toward the natural world they inhabit and are sustained by. Young women divers start training at age 10 or 11 years in shallow water, and over time are divided into 3 main groups according to the skill and experience. The lowest level or beginner is a hangun, intermediate level is jungun, and highest level is sangun. The designation of Dae Sangun is reserved for the most venerated Haenyeo, and she becomes the leader of the group. Even though the Haenyeo community is governed by rules set by the fishing industry, they are also guided by the changing tides and seasons. Their work periods are determined by the lunar calendar, and consequently so are their lives. They dive about 15 days a month between high and low tides, and when they aren't scouring the ocean floor, they are working the land, harvesting cabbage, tangerine, garlic, and onions and flowers. In true democratic fashion, their profits are divided equally. Conservation is another important component of the Haenyeo's work and a testament to the value they place on nurturing their natural environment. Once a month, they clean up the trash and litter that found its way into the sea and periodically remove the invasive seagrasses that are considered weeds. Just like any diligent farmer, they tend their underwater fields with care. The women divers adhere to strict guidelines dictating when certain types of shellfish can be harvested in an effort to maintain an innate balance in their marine habitat. The compassionate spirit of these women also extends to their communities by recognizing the vital role they play in the fabric of their society. Historically, Haenyeo have stood up for justice and fought against oppression. In 1932, the Haenyeo of Jeju Island spearheaded an anti-Japanese revolt when they realized they were being cheated out of their earnings. It lasted 4 years and is considered one of the largest protests against Japan in Korean history. Many older Haenyeo remember the bloody Jeju massacre of April 3, 1948, also known as Sasam, or the third day of the fourth month. After World War II, Korea was divided between an American-backed government in the south and a Soviet-backed one in the north. Jeju Islanders rising up and calling for a unified Korean government were seen by the local authorities as communist agitators and insurgents. The local police, aided by right-wing paramilitary forces from the mainland, attacked and overwhelmed the rebels, claiming close to 30,000 lives, including women and children. Fearing reprisal from their families, the victims of these human rights atrocities have largely remained silent since the 1990s, when a key transitional justice process led to truth commissions and reparations for victims. Ultimately, in March 2008, under the leadership of South Korean President Moon Jae-in, the Jeju 4.3 Peace Park opened to the public. This massive complex strives to honor the victims and families that suffered during the dark chapter of Korean history. The theme of giving back not only to the unseeable forces of nature, but to their culture and communities as a whole is a driving force in the lives of these resilient and stalwart women. Defying the Confucian dictates that underlie Korean culture, placing women in subservient roles, Jeju Haenyeo have given voice to their communal power for the purpose of good. Their contributions, both physically and financially, to schools, community centers, and various volunteer activities has cemented their vital role in the region. They have not only contributed to the domestic economy, but they have been a crucial force in politics and public opinion. Today, some younger Haenyeo have become activists promoting the rights of women through the efforts and recognition of the Me Too movement. But with all the positive energy and effort, the number of active Haenyeo has been steadily declining. In the 1960s, it was estimated that there were approximately 20,000 Jeju women sea divers. Today, there are less than 2,500, and most of them are over the age of 60. Before the adoption of modern wetsuits in the 1970s, diving outfits were made up of 3 garments: basic diving pants, a diving jacket, and a head cap. Cotton was used to make these pieces because it offers less resistance to the water. If you were a child of the 1950s like me, you remember wearing those old-fashioned sunsuits tied at the shoulder. Similarly, these cotton diving suits tied at the sides for easy removal and to accommodate all sizes, even pregnant women. A short jacket was worn for warmth and protection from sunburn, and looks like the top of a hanbok, or the traditional dress worn by Korean women. The third piece is very unique and looks like a bonnet of sorts. It was also made of cotton and fits tightly over the head with holes by the ears so water could flow out. Today, because the wetsuits make divers more buoyant in the water, lead weight belts are secured around the Haenyeo's waist to keep them from floating to the surface. Modern diving masks and rubber flippers complete the ensemble. Although these improvements have made the divers more productive, there is an increased risk of danger because the Haenyeo can stay in the water much longer and dive even deeper. Modern young Korean women are reluctant to embark on such a physically demanding and dangerous career, and there are more lucrative options available for income today. Recognizing their disappearing rural legacy, the South Korean government has stepped in to help by providing the wetsuits and health care for the Haenyeo free of charge. I hope you enjoyed the story of the women sea divers of Jeju Island, the Haenyeo, and their fascinating history and culture.
소리 가장 먼저 아침을 여는 나는 바다의 어미 Thank